Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association's webinar, How Geotourism is Shaping Awareness of the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. My name is Bruce Reddick, and I'm AIANTA's travel writer and photographer, and I'll be serving as today's webinar moderator. Bianca Mitchell, AIANTA's education manager, will also be helping with the webinar and managing the question and answers at the end of the presentations. For those of you who are not familiar with AIANTA, for nearly 2 decades, AIANTA has served as a national voice for American Indian nations engaged in cultural tourism. In addition to serving as the voice for Indian country tourism, AIANTA provides technical assistance and training to tribal nations and Native-owned enterprises engaged in tourism, hospitality, and recreation. In addition to webinars like this, in partnership with the George Washington University, AIANTA presents an online cultural heritage certificate program designed to help tourism professionals and tribal planners hone their cultural tourism skills. The program will run this year from next year, January 11th, February 28th to February 28th, 2021. AIANTA also provides educational opportunities for tribes through our annual American Indian Tourism Conference, or AITC. We had a great lineup of speakers this year for our virtual 22nd annual AITC, and the 2021 AITC events will be held in Fort McDowell, Arizona at the Weekapaw Casino Resort on October 25th through 28th. Please visit our website at aianta.org to learn more about our education program offerings, and at aianta.org/AITC for additional information and registration for the American Indian Tourism Conference. In today's webinar, you will learn how geotourism can benefit tribal tourism development initiatives. This webinar will explore the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail's geotourism plan and its inclusion of tribes along the trail. Guest speakers will dive into the history of the trail and showcase how existing tribal tourism cultural attractions adjacent to the trail are attracting visitors. Included will be information by the Confluence Project. Inspired by the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial, tribal leaders partnered with local tourism industry leaders to build the Confluence Project, which uses Indigenous voices to connect the history, ecology, and living cultures along the trail in the Columbia River Gorge. Today we have with us Ann Wiley, Senior Manager, National Park Service, Integrated Resource Stewardship with the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail National Park Service. He works to protect cultural, natural, and recreational resources of the trail. Also with us today is Ann McCormick, Nez Perce tribal member. Ann degreed in home economics with minors in business administration and Native American studies from the Washington State University. She was a founder and served on the Northwest Native American Basket Weavers Association. Recently, Ann was voted into the affiliated tribes of the Northwest Indians Economic Development Corporation. Ann is employed by the Nez Perce government as the Economic Development Planner in the Office of Executive Direction. Prior to this position, she worked in both the Nee-Me-Poo revitalization language and cultural arts programs. And last but not least is Colin Fogarty, director of the Confluence Project. As a public radio journalist at Oregon Public Broadcast, Colin's stories have been heard frequently on NPR, and he has won regional and national awards for his work. He has produced stories on the Columbia River's indigenous cultures, Lewis and Clark, and the silencing of Celilo Falls. Colin spent the last 7 years of his public radio career as regional editor of Public Radio's Northwest News Network, where he managed a team of reporters covering the issues and state legislatures in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. He became executive director of Confluence in 2014, a community-supported nonprofit with the mission to connect people to the history, living cultures, and ecology of the Columbia River system through Indigenous voices. In this role, Colin continues to help tell compelling stories about history, not only on the radio, but in the landscape, in schools and communities, and online. Colin and his wife, Stephanie Weon, have 3 children and live in Portland. Now, a brief intro to the Lewis and Clark Project and AIANTA's involvement. AIANTA is working alongside the National Park Service on an exciting and new program to market tribal attractions along the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. The program expands on the groundwork and contributions from the Circle of Tribal Advisors of the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial commemoration that took place in 2003-2006. There are now new opportunities for tribes to share their stories to visitors from around the globe through cultural tourism. And I'd like to introduce you to our team. Sherry Rupert, CEO for AIANTA, will actively be reaching out to tribal leaders. Most of you know Sherry, and she will be accompanying us on several of our site visits when we are able to get back on the road. Our team also includes Gail Chihak, Outreach Coordinator, Hannah Peterson, Development Director, Lorraine Gala-Lewis, Research and Data Specialist, and myself. Our mission is to reach out to tribes and tribal enterprises along the Lewis and Clark Historic Trail and help them list their businesses on two websites, lewisandclark.travel and nativeamerica.travel. With that, we'll start our presentations and we'll begin with our first speaker. Dan, can you start us off?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to talk about geotourism or sustainable tourism on the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. I'm going to start with a little bit of a background and overview of the Park Service and Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail Administration, and then move on to the Geotourism Project Perce for a brief introduction to that. So thank you very much. And the next slide is the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail is administered by the National Park Service. And as administrators of that, we are charged with a mission to preserve the remnants of the historic route of the expedition, and we to provide interpretation. Highlighted here is to allow for better visitor understanding and appreciation of the significance of the trail. So our trail purpose is next, and the purpose of the trail is to function as a commemorative body and to provide for the protection of and identification of the resources of the trail, including public use, enjoyment, preservation, of course, of historical and cultural and natural resources associated with the expedition, and its tribal history. We know the trail to be largely along rivers. 70% of the trail is water-based, and it's a corridor. We know this is a corridor because it's basically everywhere that Lewis and Clark went and described. The National Park Service, who administers the trail, doesn't own any of the land. We have a great deal of responsibility that we are willingly accept for the natural, historical, cultural, recreation resources. But we don't have a lot of authorities assigned by the Trails Act. So we operate by influence to protect these resources and to enhance visitor experience. Therefore, we are a partnership trail. And being such, we operate with literally hundreds of partnerships with land management entities, all the way to visitor centers that we don't operate, that are our partners along the trail. The trail was extended in 2019 by Congress to include the Ohio River and part of the Mississippi River. And that extension was commemorated in the next slide with the congressional delegation that represented the Ohio Valley and provided for these people brought it about, the extension of the trail. Adding the Ohio River was a considerable chunk of the trail is 1,200 miles addition, making us now 4,900 miles of trail. And this was brought about also by a lot of other individuals, including Jim Mallory of the Lewis and Clark Trust and the Ohio River chapter of the National Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation. Many, many more people were involved. And so now in the next slide, you see we are the Pittsburgh to the Pacific. We are, again, a very long trail, largely water-based. It's 4,900 miles now. There's over 60 tribal homelands that are adjacent to the trail. And this really makes us want very badly to have tribal participation in all things trail. We have embraced this concept of the Geotourism project. In the next slide, you'll see the NPS is in this for the long haul. We have made it a priority to reach out to tribes and to get the tribes involved and understand the opportunity that exists with the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail experience, the ability to retrace the expedition and explore the new people, places, and stories of the trail in the modern world as well as in history. We have a partnership. In the next slide, you'll see a partnership with AIANTA. It's been mentioned. This partnership is extremely important to us as a way of extending our reach to promote this program, geotourism program, and provide opportunity for tribes to be engaged in it. We started with AIANTA last fiscal year and will continue for another 5 years into the future, enabling tribes to be able to have representation in a free advertising form, frankly, that is beneficial to the American public. And we are so happy that things are progressing as they have been with the work with AIANTA. In the next slide, geotourism, a little bit about it. Geotourism encompasses travel, a whole range of travel. And that travel includes cultural heritage, history, food, nature, adventure, the outdoors, water, music, and the arts. Really, we're looking at a broad range of travel opportunity for the public and opportunity for the communities along the trail to get the word out about what they have to offer to the traveling public, and even post stories that nobody may travel to see, but you're able to tell the stories, historic stuff, as well as the modern day stuff. The next slide says the geotourism is tourism that sustains and enhances the geographic character of a place, its environment, culture, aesthetics, heritage, and the well-being of its residents. This is essential to the program. This is the core of the program, is to be able to sustain and enhance locations along the trail. We're looking for really providing this information to the public and long-term enhancing stewardship of the trail by many, many of the American public, as well as the tribal nations, of course. The next slide shows a Missouri River Recreation Trail. This is just an example of what we consider to be a community. We have the Community Partnership Program you'll hear more about on the geotourism program. Community partners, yes, we have traditional concept that comes to mind when you think of communities, you know, states and towns, tribal nations, partners. These are important parts of the communities and they're very welcome, but we're also not limiting it in such a fashion. We're allowing you to define your community, such as this particular example of the Missouri River Recreation Trail. We're looking for cultural experiences for the visitors. We're looking for local businesses that are somewhat unique, that may be bed and breakfast, even brew pubs and distilleries, outfitters, educational groups could be a community. We have some that have come on board as communities, historical groups. So you can become a member of this growing network of communities trail-wide and really allow a platform for to get the word out. In the next slide, you see that you can partner with the National Park Service to tell your stories. We want your stories available on this platform, lewisandclark.travel. And you can invite the public to participate in what you love about your community. You can tell about what you have, what you're doing to conserve natural and cultural resources, so what you're doing for cultural heritage, and share these experiences and invite the public to that which you would like to invite the public to. And the last slide, it just has a group of partners that we have engaged. Of course, we mentioned AIANTA, very important partner. Overall, Solimar International has been a terrific partner for 4 years now. We've been developing this trail program for geotourism, and they're doing wonderful work for us along these lines. A truly dynamic group of individuals who are developing developing tourism destinations worldwide. And of course, I mentioned the Lewis and Clark Trust and the Lewis and Clark National Trail Heritage Foundation. So thank you for the time, and look forward to the rest of this presentation where you see this coming to life.
Thank you, Dan. It's all great information, and we appreciate all your hard work on this project, and along with the support of the National Park Service. The main emphasis, of course, of this program is in ensuring that the tribal stories of the Lewis and Clark expedition and the importance are heard. In addition to providing some historical background, the project features what the tribes have to offer today. That's a lot about what Dan was talking about with the geotourism efforts. It's about what today's travelers can see and do, and what the tribes want to share and promote. And the whole effort is grounded in this geotourism. Anne, who was involved in the 2006 Bicentennial and the tribal involvement with the program, will now speak and relate her experiences, including insights pertaining to the Circle of Elders, where the Enough Good People book honored all those who made tribal involvement in the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial possible and successful. She will also highlight some tourism projects that her tribe is involved with today, and events and opportunities for visitors. Anne, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to having you share your insights.
Thank you very much. Tatsmewi, that means good morning, and Katsiayao, thank you for this opportunity. I'm really glad I'm here today. And I see up on the slide now is the Circle of Tribal Advisors book, which was published at the end of the Lewis and Clark Trail. And so I just want to be an advocate for the way that this process worked, because in the beginning, there was ambassadors who came out to see the tribe, or we got an invitation by letter. I don't quite know how it worked, where they approached the leadership on the Lewis and Clark Trail. And people here at home really didn't know what to think of that, because it was earmarked as kind of a celebration. Well, I think to Lewis and Clark Trekkies, it was a celebration, but to the tribes, they felt much differently about it. So it was, I think, a very good measure that the parks listened to that, either non-answer or the fact that the tribes couldn't be involved in a celebration, and they rethought the process, and they brought a group of tribal leaders together and had very frank discussions about how to have the tribes involved. And so they came up with the Circle of Tribal Advisors, and then they met regularly for a time, and they planned out the entire strategy of how to keep the tribes engaged. And at first it was only the tribes that were along the trail, but then they even said, well, the tribes who aren't even on the trail have significant stories too, and they invited them in. And so I think when the circle was broadened and you could see that the tribal people were going to be able to tell their authentic story, then then the tribes were willing to get involved. Then also along with that came financial resources. So then the Circle of Advisors were providing guidance on all the celebrations as far as the programming, the protocol, the event leadership, and the fundraising. And then they actually went out as the ambassadors to each event. And I think that's the connection that needs to happen, is it was tribe to tribe. And then all along the trail, everybody felt comfortable that the protocols were met and that the tribes really were respected. And I think that was so important. So if anytime in geotourism, when you're dealing with tribes or really anybody, it's very important to respect their input, and that they get to tell their story in the way that they want to. So I think that really added to the success of the Lewis and Clark Trail as far as the tribes were concerned. Now, we were commemorating the Lewis and Clark Trail by offering the national annual signature event of Summer of Peace with the Nee-Me-Poo. And there were many wonderful events that happened that week. We had, I'm sorry, could you move to the next slide? Oh, next slide. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about now, was that we opened with a Nez Perce horse parade, and then they had a drive. So that was really beautiful. And then one part that I was involved in was before we were able to leave the reservation, dignitaries would come to the reservation, as well as from other tribes and formal dignitaries that were not tribal. So we thought of a way to welcome people, and we have women young women that perform the welcome dance. So that was one thing that we brought back just for this occasion. And there were so many people who had never even participated in that, the young girls, and they were very anxious to do it. And they all got new dresses, and that was a real educational part for the tribes, because a lot of what we did internally was to make clothing, or to make things that would have been, some of them would have been used at that time, or to dress as historical as possible. So we had these welcome dance at the beginning of the event, and there were so many photographs taken, and it really added to the beauty of the day. And so we went all through the week, and another really big highlight was a tule mat lodge was erected. And also we had horses everywhere, and then we had leaders speaking. But the main thing was that we were able to tell our tribal story. And there you see a horse ride going on there. And that goes into what the legacy is after that, as far as what we do on a regular basis. We have 2 horse clubs that offer a ride. One is very long, and it celebrates or commemorates the ride of the flight of the Nez Perce that almost made it to Canada. Is 1,300 miles long, and they do a 1-year stretch. In a year, they do 100 miles. And there's about 300 to 400 people that go on there at that ride. Many of them are tribal members, but they're also non-tribal members. And you don't even have to ride the horse. You can be in the camp, and you can be at the beginning of the ride for the day and then end up in the camp to be with the person that's making the trek, the ride. And so that lasts about a week. And then we have another horse club, and they offer a shorter ride. I think they go out for a couple days, but they do that a number of times a year. And that is historical significance because the tribes, by the time Lewis and Clark came, were really into horses. We got the horse, we developed the horse, we bred the horse, and it became one of our high priority trade items. So everybody in the tribe could own a horse, and there were many, many in this area because the natural environment allowed very good eating for the horse. So we were able to build up large herds. So it was, I think when Lewis and Clark came, it was quite a sight for them since they were in high need of horses and we had plenty. Next slide, please. So now we're going into typical events that we have on an annual basis. What you're seeing here is where we have an outside arena where there's dances conducted every year for the Homeland Project, and that's in Wallowa, Oregon. The Nez Perce tribal homelands stretch from Oregon, Washington, Idaho into Montana. And this is where Chief Joseph and his family come from, the Wallowa band. And this is believed to be the area in which he and his people lived on. And so it's very significant to the traditional people in the tribe and also to the spiritual people in the tribe that practice Indian religion. And so they have this annual gathering, of which is a powwow for entire weekend, the third weekend of July. And then the next day they have religious services. And it took about 25 years to get this arbor, and then also to get the longhouse, of which they have built now. It's about 5 years old, but that took 20 years to fundraise and get the money to have it built. I think we have a slide of that. Next slide. Oh, there's the longhouse. And it has a wonderful, amazing kitchen in it. And the very interesting point about this project is that it is both the Wallowa County people, the non-Indian people, who have helped the Nez Perce tribe for 25 years to fundraise and to get the arbor, to purchase the land, get the arbor, and have this longhouse built. So this can be used both for religious purposes, for Indian religious purposes, but also for gatherings of the local community. It's a sharing, of which is, I think, one of the very few projects that I know of which allows for Indian church and then also for the community to use on a regular basis. It's a complete partnership, and it is maybe even stronger now than when they started it 25 years ago. The tribal people really love it because it's an outside powwow. And we do have inside powwows back at Lapwai, Idaho, which are highly celebrated too and attended, large people. But this one is very organic and it's very beautiful. And so if you were a person that really wanted to go and touch base with tribal people more one-on-one, this is the event that I would suggest. Next slide, please. Oh, here's another photo of the arbor. It's just a beautiful setting, and there's all kinds of places to be able to camp. There's showers, there's bathroom facilities, and it's in the open, and it's just a beautiful setting in order to be able to be at peace and to celebrate Indianness. The Nez Perce way. Okay, next slide, please. So now I'd like to touch a little bit on the trail that turns into the Lewis and Clark Trail. The tribal people know that the first trail was built by the animals, and then the tribal people, the Nee-Me-Poo, walked on it. We were walking people for many, many years, and then we became water people because we invented the canoe and we were able to travel on the waterways. So for many, many centuries, we did that. But then about 70 years before Lewis and Clark came, the horse came. So then we were able to breed the horses and build up our herd, and riding became the way of life. So our travels became much more extensive. But what is the interesting thing is that the Nez Perces believe that to be the Nez Perce Trail, of which is records the flight from the beginning of Wallowa or Joseph, Oregon, all the way up into Canada, 50 miles before you get into Canada, because that is where the surrender of Chief Joseph and his people were at. And then, but before that, now they call that the Lewis and Clark Trail. So it's many, many trails to many, many people. But what we do for our interpretation is that we've got an auto tour and we have interpretation at the national park, and we have signage all up and down that trail of historical significance for the visitor. Next slide, please. Oh, and here we see, here's the trail of the Nez Perce Nee-Me-Poo that's 30 years old, and that's managed by the Forest Service. And also the Nee-Me-Poo Trail is very involved in the Homeland Project because the trail actually begins in the Wallowas. So their support and are a partner to the Homeland Project that we just spoke of. So you can see that you can go all along the trail, and there's different kind of events that you can go to, but there's a great deal of signage. And we were involved in the signage for the Nee-Me-Poo Trail, then the Lewis and Clark Trail, and then after that, the National Scenic Byways provided another vehicle for even more signage. So the trail is very well signed. And if you were a motorist that went on there, you could really grasp many of the historical sites and learn about the Nee-Me-Poo and the historical events that have happened throughout our history. Okay, next slide. So, well, we've been talking about the Lewis and Clark Trail, and I think what I would say here is that we've already mentioned, but also again, thinking about the Circle of Advisors and our Summer Among the Nee-Me-Poo, these stories really came out. We have origin stories, we have trading stories, because that's what we were really known for. And we also have personal stories from the localities of where we come from. We lived in bands, and that usually would amount to about 130 people in one band, and you were about 100 miles apart from another band. And the reason for that is because of food sustainability. That area of land, the amount of people would require that area of land in order to be able to sustain the people with enough food. So there were many, many bands in the Nez Perce homelands. Next slide. Oh, and here we have one of the great signs of interpretation that was developed by the Lewis and Clark Trail. And I just want to put a plug in for the Sacagawea Cultural Center. They're in Salmon, Idaho, and they also were heavy participants because they were part of the story. You can think of Sacagawea, who became one of my idols because she was a woman of leadership. There was a coin made of her, and I loved, no matter where you went or what you talked about the Lewis and Clark Trail, you couldn't speak about it without mentioning Sacagawea. She was such an integral part of the Lewis and Clark journey. And so she was really acting and performing such as all Native women do, or who we aspire to be like and to be a leader of. She was a knowledgeable, dignified leader among all of those men. And I think it really became important for our young people to learn about Sacagawea. So if you go to this center, I think that you would be able to do that. It's in Salmon, Idaho. So with that, I think I'll close, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. And I really believe in geotourism. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't think we've got a chance to talk about, I thought I was running out of time. I don't think we've gotten a chance to talk about the Nez Perce National Historical Park, of which was developed in 1985. And actually, that's why geotourism comes so easy to the Nez Perce tribe, because we've been heavily involved in a partnership with the National Park Service since that time. And the mission of the park is to tell the Nez Perce story. And now, if you go to the park at any given day, who you will meet and engage with is a Nez Perce tribal member interpreter. So many people come to the area and they want to meet Nez Perce people. Well, now when you go to the park, you'll be able to do that. And it's very important to the tribe that these jobs are being provided for our people, but also it validates that the Nez Perce people are telling their own story in the national park, and we really consider that a win-win. And so I encourage you to visit there as often as possible. We have a historical exhibit. It's really beautiful. And one thing that happened after the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial, we got a stick-built casino, which is 3 miles away, and they put in a culture walk, and in the culture walk is an 11-foot tall Chief Joseph. And the Park Service, in a partnership with the enterprise part of the Nez Perce tribe, they are able to have change out contemporary exhibits there. So they rotate them about every 6 months to a year. And we have a very vast collection of material culture that is stored in the park. And this way they can choose different themes and bring out different valuables of the tribe and tell yet another story about the Nee-Me-Poo. So with that, I'll end and say Katsiayo, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Those personal insights are so important in continuing the work and efforts of tribal tourism and building upon all the hard work of those involved in the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial. And just it's so great to hear the stories that you have and all the hard work that has already gone into this effort. And it helps move forward with today's geotourism efforts of the Nez Perce. We'll now have Colin speak. And Colin will talk a little bit about the Confluence Project and everything it has done and all of its hard work, and beginning with some of the work in the Bicentennial and how the whole project evolved. Colin, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you so much, Bruce. And I also want to just give a special thanks to Anne for all of her words and what she's been able to share today. The Nez Perce tribe and Anne herself and tribal council members and a lot of elders from the Nez Perce tribe really played a pivotal role in the development of Confluence. And I just want to take this moment to thank her and thank the Nee-Me-Poo and the Nez Perce Tribal Council for their leadership in the development of Confluence. So go ahead to the next slide there, Bruce, and you can, it's a picture of the Columbia River. And if you click it one more time, you'll see the mission of Confluence. And you can check us out, by the way, at confluenceproject.org. That's our website. Our mission is to connect people with the history, with the living cultures and the ecology of the Columbia River system through Indigenous voices. And I really appreciated Anne's words about the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial and how tribes really viewed it, because our founding board chair, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see him, is Antone Minthorn. And like a lot of tribal leaders throughout the Northwest, there were many people who were skeptical about the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial, that it not be a celebration per se. And there were others who didn't want to participate at all. And Antone felt very strongly that this was an opportunity. This was an opportunity for tribal leaders and for tribal voices to tell their story on their terms, that the story is not fundamentally that Lewis and Clark discovered this place, right? We all know that. We are all aware of that. Lewis and Clark did not discover the Columbia River system. In fact, they met people, and the descendants of those people are still here. And he saw the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial as an opportunity to tell that story. And meanwhile, our founding director, Jane Jacobson, also felt very strongly that the story needed to have a tribal focus. The story needed to be about Native people, the indigenous voices of these places, and it needed to include art, permanent art installations along the Columbia River system where people could come and learn and connect with this history, with the broader, more inclusive history. So go ahead to the next slide. Antone and Jane very famously within 24 hours were not aware of each other and were working independently. And they both independently had the idea to approach this woman, Maya Lin, whose birthday was just yesterday, I was reminded of. And Maya Lin, as you may know, is the artist behind the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And Antone was a Vietnam era veteran and had been to the memorial and really felt that she was an artist who could come and really commemorate and connect people with the indigenous history of this place in a way that no one else could. It was also a very practical decision to elevate the tribal stories of the Columbia River on a national and international scale, to bring an internationally known artist. Maya was not the least bit interested in commemorating Lewis and Clark or celebrating Lewis and Clark. And the joke for many years was, well, she's not going to build a statue of two white guys pointing west, right? Actually, that's west, sorry. And she was not interested in that. But what she was interested in is connecting people with the cultural history of the Columbia River system, and also the ecological story of the transformation of the Columbia River system over the last 200 years. And she says to this day that she only said yes to this project when she understood who was asking, who was making this request, and that it was coming from people like Antone Minthorn and people like Otis Half Moon from the Nez Perce tribe and others throughout the Columbia River system. Theirs were the voices that she was interested in elevating and enhancing and really focusing people's attention on. So go ahead to the next slide. So throughout the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial celebration, there of course was a lot of focus on, what are the Lewis and Clark sites? What are the sites that are significant to the Lewis and Clark journey? Confluence's focus was, what are the sites that are significant in tribal history? And that's where the name Confluence came, because if you look at all of these sites, and on the left-hand side of your screen is the mouth of the Columbia River in Chinook homelands, and on the right-hand side of your screen is another site in Nez Perce homelands called Chief Timothy Park along the Snake River. And each one of these sites tended to be confluences because, of course, the rivers were a uniting place. Now, the Columbia River is a border between Oregon and Washington, but historically, for 16,000 years, we know, the Columbia River system were places where people gathered, and particularly those highways where those different river highways met became significant culturally, historically, economically. So all of these sites are along some kind of confluence, the confluence of the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean, the confluence of the Sandy River and the Columbia River, the confluence of the Klickitat Trail and the Columbia River, the confluence of the Snake River and the Columbia River. And I'll get to the Chief Timothy site. There was some thought that it would be at the confluence of the Snake and the Clearwater Rivers. It's actually about 9 miles or 11 miles away from that. And I was reminded a few years ago by a Nez Perce elder that it is the confluence of the Snake River and El Poe Creek. But all of these are significant sites. And one thing that has really become clear over the years of the partnership between tribal leaders and non-tribal people working to build these art sites is that Confluence is more than just a place. It's also a metaphor for the story. If we grew up, and I'm old enough that I grew up, that this was a story about discovery, right? This was a story that somehow Lewis and Clark discovered this place. If we are to replace that, what is that? What is fundamentally, if you boil it down to one word, what is the story of this place? Sure, it's in many ways, it's the story of America, but specifically the Columbia River system, what is the story? And we contend that it's a story about confluence, about people coming together, about cultures coming together, about stories coming together, ecologies coming together for a shared future. So confluence is not just a place, it's also a metaphor. So I'm going to go through each one of these sites, and I tend to go on too long, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on each one of these sites, but I do want to kind of draw attention to some of the artistic features and how they draw people in and invite the visitor to learn more about the Columbia River system. So go ahead to the next slide, Bruce. And we'll start with a Cape Disappointment. And there are lots of different features in this site. It was a redevelopment of the state park at the mouth of the Columbia River. But I just want to talk a little bit about this pathway, because this is a pathway that goes to the Pacific Ocean. And it's literally right where Lewis and Clark in their Corps of Discovery walked on the beach at the Pacific Ocean and actually made it to the end of their journey. You on this boardwalk, you retrace the steps of Lewis and Clark. But etched into this boardwalk is a spreadsheet that William Clark did in the winter of 1805, where he marked all the places of significance that they had encountered in their 3,000-mile journey. And part of this spreadsheet included the homelands, all of the native indigenous homelands that they had passed through on their way to this particular spot. So as you are retracing the steps of Lewis and Clark, you are reminded that they have passed through indigenous homelands of people who are still here, and people that they encountered. So that's just one of the artistic features of Cape Disappointment. That was completed in 2006, and so let's go to the next slide. The Confluence Land Bridge at Fort Vancouver is literally a bridge, and you can see it if you hit the button one more time, Bruce. You can see this bridge from above. This is the only site that was not designed by Maya Lin. She consulted on it, and the shape of it was definitely her idea. But it was constructed and designed by an architect named John Paul Jones from Seattle, who is native. And it was an effort to reconnect the community of Vancouver with the river that made it a community in the first place, because it had been cut off by that freeway you see there, and also by the railroad tracks, as so many river communities have. This is an effort to bring people back to the riverfront and also connect people with the indigenous history. And what you see there is a welcome gate with a glass sculpture of a Chinookan woman to honor the Chinookan women who shaped that landscape. And that welcome gate and some of the other artistic features were designed by an artist named Lillian Pitt, who is Warm Springs. And she is still involved in Confluence to this day. So go ahead to the next site, the land bridge, and the next site, which is the Confluence Bird Blind at the Sandy River Delta near Troutdale, Oregon. Both of them were built in 2008, and the bird blind is inside is an outdoor room, and in the shape of an ellipse. And on the inside is a list, and it's a list of the species that Lewis and Clark documented on their westward journey. The birds, the fish, and the animals that they documented, and their environmental status today. So it's a reminder of the transformation that has happened of the entire ecology of the United States. So let's go to the next slide, and we come to Sacagawea State Park back one more. Sacagawea State Park is in Pasco, Washington, and Tri-Cities, and it's a series of circles that connect people with the stories, the indigenous stories of the Columbia River system. And you can see there's salmon. There's one of these circles is not actually a circle, it's literally an ellipse, and it's deliberately designed in the shape of a longhouse to remind people of the indigenous history of this place. So let's go ahead to Chief Timothy Park, which is, as I mentioned, in Nez Perce homelands along the Snake River. And this too is an ellipse, and it's designed to honor the Nez Perce people. And what you see there on your left is a dedication ceremony that we had when it was completed in 2015. This shape of this, and actually, Bruce, if you could go back 2 more pictures just to eliminate those two, you can see the basic shape. This is based on a blessing ceremony that happened in 2005, led by Horace Axtell and Wilfred Scott. And in this blessing ceremony, and Anne, I don't know if you were there at that time in 2005, but in this blessing ceremony, the men sat facing one direction, the women faced another direction, the elders faced east, and no one had their backs to the east so that they could welcome a new day. And Maya's idea about this, she was so struck by this ceremony, was to take the spiritual landscape that that they had created in this ceremony and build it into the physical landscape to remind people that this has always been Nez Perce homelands and it always will be Nez Perce homelands. So it's a beautiful site in eastern Washington along Highway 12 and about 11 miles east of Clarkston, Washington. So I really recommend going there if you can. So the final site, and I'm just about out of time, so I'm going to make this really quick and then kind of just summarize what we're up to now. The final site is not yet complete, and it's at Celilo Park, where Celilo Falls once roared. And as many of you, I hope, know, Celilo Falls was really a center of commerce, a center of fishing, a center of cultural and spiritual life. Since time immemorial. In the spring, 6 times more water flowed over Celilo Falls than flows over Niagara Falls today. And in 1957, the Dalles Dam flooded Celilo Falls, so that roar has been silenced. And what Maya has designed is an elevated walkway inspired by the traditional fishing platforms that you would have seen there, that Lewis and Clark would have seen there when they came there in 1805. And they called it the Great Mart, by the way, the great trading place where native people from thousands and thousands of miles away came to trade and to fish and to find a mate. And so there are 3 purposes of this project, and the first is to educate people about Celilo Falls, because this is one of the most significant places along the Columbia River, and so many people today just don't know anything about it. So the second reason, or the second purpose of this project, is to honor the Indigenous people of the Columbia River system, because it's about time that we publicly honor the people who have been here since time immemorial. And the third purpose of this project is to strengthen the tribal presence in the public spaces along the river, which is very important to the tribal leaders that we work with. This project is currently on hold, and I could get into this if you want, but I won't spend a whole lot of time on it. There are 4 tribes connected to 4 federally recognized tribes connected to Celilo Park, and they are the Nez Perce, the Warm Springs, the Umatilla, and the Yakima. And the project proceeded after 2011 because all 4 of those tribes were on board. But there was a tribal council change at the Yakima Nation, and the new tribal council did not support the project. So we are continuing to have a discussion and a dialogue with members of the Yakima Nation to listen to any concern that they have about it. But we are still committed to the project because our other 3 tribal partners are too, and they have advised us to be patient and just wait for the right time. And it's better to do this project right than to do it right now. So just really quickly, and Bruce, why don't we just sort of scroll through these next slides and just get to the end. Our focus a lot now is about education. So we have a program that brings Native artists into schools to educate the next generations about Indigenous history and to bring their voices into the schools. To share what they want to share in the way they can. And as we've been doing this education, we've really found that teachers need support too. So we've developed a professional development program for teachers. We've also developed a program of trying to bring these voices out into the public sphere through what we call Confluence story gatherings. In an age of COVID, we're not doing this in person anymore. We're doing this now strictly online. And in fact, we have a series of programs coming up this fall. We have to maintain our sites. This is public art and they deteriorate. So we have work parties and we have volunteers that come and take care of these sites. This is a picture of a work party last year that drew 90 people to the land bridge. And we can't do that now, but so instead we're doing, literally this month, I was out there just yesterday, a series of small work parties of 5 to 10 people at a time. social distanced, all masked, where we're spreading mulch, picking up trash, and fixing the place up. So if you keep on going, one of our big focuses right now is our website, developing our website as a library of information, of interviews, of voices. And I'm sure you recognize Scotty and Bessie, two Nez Perce elders, who, and you can see excerpts of our interviews with them and many others. There are documentaries, there are maps on our website about the Columbia River system. And our hope is that this is really a central repository of Native voices telling their story, sharing what they want to share as appropriate as they see fit. And it's just growing. So it's confluenceproject.org. And the last slide was one of my favorite photos of kids at Celilo Falls. They call this the Celilo Falls, the Little Rascals of Celilo Village. This is just one of many photos in many photo galleries that are part of that library. So that's really, and you can go ahead to the end there, Bruce. That's what we do now is through our sites, through classroom programs, and through public programs and our digital library. That's how we connect people to the history, living cultures, and ecology of the Columbia River system through Indigenous voices. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Colin. That's just a beautiful work, and just it's so impressive with all the creativity. I always love visiting your website too. There's so many great examples, and it's also important for this geotourism effort. Your team's hard work is much appreciated. Thank you so much. Just as a quick review too, Dan had mentioned it, we really want to get your assets, your geotouristic efforts listed on Lewis and Clark.travel and also on AIANTA's website, nativeamerica.travel. So if you could gather any information that you want listed on those two websites, we would really like to promote it. They complement each other, and they're two big drivers of this project. And so we really want to hear your stories. And also, if you want a little bit of background on the Bicentennial and what work was done in the past, there's a great website. It's for the tribal legacy, and it's at lctriballegacy.org. We ran across that, and they have a lot of great information. And if you have any problems putting together that information, please reach out to me. That's my job, is to help get these listings on the two websites. So just feel free to reach out and contact me. Send me an email or give me a holler. This is our contact information, Dan and Colin and mine, all of our emails. And you can always get my email off the AIANTA website as well. So we're very easy to get a hold of. So I think what we'll do now is I'm going to hand it over to Bianca, and she is going to answer any questions that might have come in. And so I'm going to leave it over to her. And if any questions come in after the webinar, you can always email Bianca, and her email is bmitchell, MITCHELL @aianta.org. And so Bianca, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and thank you Dan, Ann, and Colin, and as well as Bruce for moderating today. I do want to mention again, if you do have any questions, you can email the panelists or myself at bmitchell@aianta.org. Thank you for that, Bruce. We don't have any questions, but we do have a couple of comments from Matthew Noeck. I hope I said that right. He's also saying we should promote the National Parks Trail as a major national bicycle trail. We should also extend the trail to include the XL route and return route. And then another comment from Laura. This is such an interesting and inspiring work. Thank you, everyone. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, just go ahead and email us. I'd also like to mention that if you are not a member of AIANTA and would like to be, please visit our website at AIANTA.org, aianta.org, and look for the support tab, and you'll find our membership information there. Or you can email Gail Shehak, our membership coordinator, and her email is gchehak@aianta.org. And I'd like to thank everyone again. We appreciate you being here today, and Have a great day. Thank you, Bruce. Actually, we have one question. This is a big question. I'm curious what the biggest challenges to this work are. Anyone want to take that? Dan, Colin, Ann?
I think the main thing is just gathering a lot of the stories. Whenever we've done our outreach calls and reached out, we can't travel now and meet a lot of the tribes in person. So the big challenge, of course, has been the COVID outbreak. That's limited our travel, but it hasn't limited our ability to reach out to the tribes and gather these stories. And it's been received very well. Every call that we've made, people are very enthusiastic about the program. And now is the time to really promote and get this information on these two websites, because when travel season does start up again, people are already visiting websites. It's so important to have a strong web presence and to get your information out there, because people are pretty much stuck in front of their screens right now. So they're doing research for when they can get out and travel, what they can see, what they can do. And of course, having the tribes tell their story through their words on these two websites is just so powerful. So yes, we've had some challenges, but with every challenge, opportunities pop up. And I think this is one of them. This is the perfect time to really push your whatever you want to promote on through this effort.
Thank you for that, Bruce. And just so you know that, yes, the webinar has been recorded, and you can find that on the AIANTA website under webinars. You will be able to view this as well. Okay, I think we're about done here. Our hour is up. So thank you again, panelists and Bruce. You all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.